This is the Connecticut Water Guy Hour. And now here's your host, Paul, your Connecticut Water Guy.
Hi, welcome to the first episode of Paul, the Connecticut Water Guy. It's very, very crazy to be on the radio for the first time, so I want to go ahead and introduce a little bit more about what made me fall in love with water, and hopefully I can get some cool facts out there that are going to pique your interest and make you want to tune in more, because we're planning on doing this every single week. So my name's Paul, and I have been doing, crazy to say this, I've been doing water since July 1st of 2015. That has been 100% my life. Before that, I was actually with a big box home improvement store. Not sure if I could say the name, but either way, they wear a lot of orange in there, and I was with the corporate side of the business, actually with the installation programs, and they had over 30 different installation programs in pretty much all the country, and I was in charge of a lot of that for this section of the region, and water treatment was actually one of those programs. And when I first started my career, I was up in the Chicago and Milwaukee area, and I got a chance to get familiar with a product called Kinetico. Kind of a weird name. I like to say that it's kinetic energy with an O on the end, so Kinetico, if people are having a hard time understanding what I'm trying to say here. But it's pretty cool stuff. It was invented back in 1970 up in Ohio, and it's the only one out there that's completely does not use electricity, so it's a non-electric unit. And like I said, it was invented back in 1970. It's been made in the U.S. ever since, which is really cool. And that was the program that I was really familiar with up in Milwaukee, because with the Great Lakes up there, we saw some pretty interesting water problems, and the Kinetico products were perfect for fixing that. Fast forward back to 2010, and I moved down to an opportunity with the company here in Richmond. Never been to Virginia before in my life, and quite honestly, I had no idea what to expect. And it was kind of the same job, pretty much the same job, except for we had a more traditional water treatment company down here doing that program. And I remember listening to them get me up to speed on the differences. And when they were done, I kept thinking to myself, well, that's nowhere near as good as the Kinetico. And I just put it in the back of my mind. And for the next 5 years, we were focusing in on other things and made some decisions that can't really go into too many of the details, but let's just say that the Kinetico program was put in place here in the Richmond area. And it was so exciting to see them and the passion and the product out here that was far superior to anything else. I made a career change, and now I am one of the managing partners of the Richmond location. So I say the Richmond location, I should probably explain that a little bit more. Advanced Water Systems was our Advanced Water Systems. There's a couple other companies that go by that name around here, but completely not affiliated. But ours was started back in 1986 down in Morehead City, North Carolina, by a gentleman that had actually purchased one of the very first Kinetico units when he lived up in Ohio. And he moved down to Morehead City and needed water treatment, and that was back, like I said, in the mid-'80s, and couldn't get a dealer. There was no dealers in place of the Kinetico, and he reached out to the factory, and they said, well, if you want a Kinetico, you may have to start a dealership. And that's exactly what he did, and Advanced Water Systems has grown to, we have 12 offices now. We're actually the number one largest dealer of the Kinetico products in the world, so that's a pretty cool thing. And that had a lot to do with my decision to change careers. And it's kind of funny because I still have a lot of good contact and relationships with all of my former peers, and they always ask me, do you want to come back? And I say, heck no, I haven't stopped smiling in 8 years. So I love what I do. I get to help people every single day. I see a lot of folks that are in this industry not for those same reasons. I see a lot of, without turning it negative, I see a lot of greed and some fraudulent things going on that we'll talk about, I'm sure, in future episodes here. I'd love to really educate folks on what really can fix the water and what is a great waste of money. It's always nice to know that before you waste your money. But pretty much that's how I ended up in the business that I am now. And 8 years later, last month, that was a huge milestone for me. This office has grown from literally myself and one other person up to we have 8 people in the office, all employees. We've all committed our lives to this, so it's a hand-picked team, and everybody is literally like a member of family. So it's pretty cool. We have over 170 at this point, 5-star perfect Google reviews, because our goals, we will never sacrifice quality or anything else for that matter. We'll never sacrifice that towards less than perfection. So excellence is our goal. Anyway, that's enough talk about the business side of things. A lot of folks have heard the preview for this episode where we use the splashing of a pool and talk about pool water. It's kind of funny because that is actually a true statement about the water here in the Richmond area. So let's talk about, all of these episodes are going to be based around water. Now, I'm not talking about the oceans or anything like that. I'm talking about the water that you actually use in your home. Really, that boils down to irrigation, using water for washing things, using water for drinking. And washing, that could be clothes, it could be dishes, it could be your house, it could be toilets, it could be us, it could be showers and tubs. But that's the kind of water that we're going to focus in on, because there's a lot of stuff in the water that can, you don't even realize it, but your water impacts your health. It impacts the life of your house and a lot of the appliances in it. It impacts how you can fall in love with your water every single day. It's kind of crazy to say that, but it's true. But no matter who's listening on the show, and I know we don't have a massive footprint in terms of the coverage area, but everybody that's listening is either getting their water from the city or county, or you're getting it from what we call a private well, or you may have some sort of a hybrid that we call the community well. And the interesting difference is that a private well, which is about 20% of people in America, actually still get all of their water every day from a private well. Well, the EPA has absolutely no regulations or any control over private wells. So if you're getting your water out of a hole in the ground, which is exactly what it is, it is 100% up to you to make sure that water has quality levels that are good for your for what you're using it for, including your health. As we kind of get into more people using water out of that same source, like a community well, usually a community well is kind of as the name implies, it's a smaller community, maybe 30, 40 houses, maybe 50. And they're all serviced not by what we call city or county water, but they're actually serviced by some series of wells that are maintained and overseen by usually a company or an organization, like Aqua Virginia, for example. They're pretty popular around here for providing community well services, but they do have to meet minimum EPA regulations. So there's a lot of great things that go on with having a community well. You don't have to maintain your own well pump, your own pressure tank, or anything like that. And you don't have to worry about the water coming in exceeding the EPA's maximum contaminant levels, because it's already going to be monitored for you. And then the final way that you would get your water, which is probably most of our listening audience, is city or county. As the name implies, it's massive areas that are all served by underground pipes and water towers and a distribution system that can go on pretty extensively. It's kind of funny. For example, the city of Richmond gets the water obviously out of the James River, and Henrico County is on that exact same water supply. So Henrico and city of Richmond are the same water for the most part. But it's funny because up in Hanover, for example, most of that area actually gets their water from the county of Henrico. So it's shocking to a lot of folks up in Hanover when they find out that they're drinking water out of the James River. They're like, oh, how did that happen? But funny but true. So it's interesting how far the water can really travel to get to the end user when you get into some of these city and county distribution systems. I like to throw in weird facts now and then just to keep things interesting. Virginia Beach, for example, they're proud to tell you that they get their water from a lake reservoir. Well, they're getting their water pumped in from Lake Gaston, which is in the southern part of Virginia, down there at the North Carolina border. For those of you that are familiar with it, it's a beautiful lake. It's always it's got the beautiful houses. It's got docks. Every time you go down there, the water level is literally perfect, and that's where they actually get the water that goes over to Virginia Beach from, a massive piping. But the funny part about that is that Lake Gaston is fed from Carr Lake, and they pronounce it Carr, but it's Kerr, which never made sense to me because I'm from the north originally. But Carr Lake is basically a big dammed up area where a couple of different rivers come together. So if you're following this, Virginia Beach is getting their water from a lake, but that lake is made and maintained from another lake that is completely fed from two rivers. And you would be shocked if you saw the kind of stuff washing up on the banks of Carr Lake. Every time there's a big rainstorm down there, we see just a lot of driftwood and things like that. But we also see a lot of trash and debris because all the runoff from the streets and the ditches ends up going into the rivers, and the rivers go down into Carr Lake. And the dam actually filters those big chunks out so they don't really show up downstream. But anyway, that's kind of a roundabout way of saying that even though you think you might know where your water is coming from, if you really start tracing it back, sometimes it's kind of shocking to find out the origin of these things. So those are the three basic types of water sources that everybody has. And as we look at each one of those has common contaminants. Let's say, for example, if you're on city or county water, some of the biggest, most prominent things that we treat for are chlorine, chloramines, which is a mixture of chlorine and ammonia, hardness due to calcium, as well as around here mild levels of silica, and then TDS, which is an acronym for total dissolved solids, which it doesn't really tell you anything other than it's a measure of how pure the water is, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But those are the common contaminants that if you're on city water, county water, that you're going to have to deal with. If you're on a community well, you'll have all of the ones I just mentioned, plus you may have some manganese and some iron. because a lot of those community wells don't use as much chlorine, and it can cause some other things to kind of show up that would normally be kind of filtered out by using the chlorine method. And then if you're on a private well, you have a whole multitude of things, but just a real quick, the top 6 are pH, hardness, pathogens, which are basically anything that's alive in the water, viruses, bacteria, parasites, things like that, iron. You can have manganese in your water. You can have silica in your water. It's actually a pretty common one around here. Almost everybody's got that. But that's kind of in a nutshell how I like to break down how you're getting your water and what might be in it. And that's a lot to cover. Like I said, we have the Richmond office of the of Advanced Water Systems. We're the Connecticut actual dealer for this area, and we specialize in explaining a lot of this stuff. You can find us on our website at ConnecticutRichmond.com, and like I said, Connecticut is Kinetico, Richmond.com, or you can just give us a call at 877-60-WATER. That's 877-609-2837. Don't forget that it's not 60 water, it's 60 water. So we look forward to all of our 8-person team at this point looks forward to answering any questions that you might have. If you have any questions, concerns, pretty much any content that you think you might want to hear in any future episodes, myths, I mean, it can be anything. If it's related to anything to do with water, we want to hear about it. You can go on the website and submit a request through our ConnecticutRichmond.com site, or you can just simply give us a call, 877-60-WATER, and we'll be more than happy to go ahead and take that, and we'll include it in any future shows that that you might have. I think we are getting pretty close to our first commercial break. We're going to go ahead and take a pause right now. Thank you. Hi, this is Paul again with Paul the Connecticut Water Guy. Episode 1, I guess, is our official title here. And what we just got done talking about before the break was kind of an explanation about where your water comes from, what type of water you might be using in your house. And we did a quick recap of some of the common contaminants that are found in water. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in some detail about some of those contaminants. And the first one, the one that I find really, really interesting that probably impacts most of the folks listening, is on city or county water, and it's chlorine. So chlorine is quite an interesting chemical because the city or the county, the municipality, has to go ahead and meet certain criteria with the water quality as it relates to the EPA's, what we call the MCLs, or the maximum contaminant levels. Those maximum contaminant levels can vary depending on what the contaminant is, and let's just suffice it to say that some of these are they're contaminant levels that can be enforced, and some of them are just highly recommended. So chlorine is actually one of those enforceable primary contaminant levels. And the total chlorine level is monitored so that it doesn't go over 4 parts per million. And some people like to see that in terms of milligrams per liter. It's the exact same number. It's just a different way to say it. So hopefully I cleared up a little bit about some of the ways that things are talked about. But 4 parts per million of chlorine is it's a level that has been determined as the maximum before it starts to become a problem for long-term health. And it's enough you have to have enough chlorine to basically keep the water safe from where it's being processed until it gets into your home, what we call the point of entry. So if you could think about this, you've got perfect, flawless water, let's just say, over at the water plant, and now they've got to get that water to you, so they dose it with chlorine to keep that water safe. Now, what they have found over the years, and chlorine's actually been used as a disinfectant like this for a very long time. I want to say 100 years roughly. But it's not a vitamin. It's nothing that you actually want in your water once it crosses that point of entry and goes into your house. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of folks think that because it's in the water, they're supposed to have it. Well, I like to compare chlorine to the bag at the supermarket. So you go to the supermarket, you get all of your produce and your avocados and your lettuce. You don't just put them in your arm and carry them home. You put them in a bag. And the only purpose for that bag is to safely get your product to your door. But once you get home, you don't eat the bag. You take the bag out. And that's exactly what we do with the chlorine. The chlorine has done its job. It's kept the pathogens from getting into your water until it gets to your house. And now you can take it out and go ahead and use the water the way it was supposed to be enjoyed. So as chlorine is doing its job, let's just say, for example, that there's about 30 to 40%, I believe was the latest number, of municipal water sources across the U.S., 30 to 40% of them are actually shifting over to a mixture of chlorine and chloramine. And the reason that they're shifting over is because when you use just regular chlorine, the chlorine, when it's reacting with organic things, stuff in the pipes that it's designed to go ahead and attack, it creates what are called disinfection byproducts. It's just basically compounds that contain chlorine. And the unfortunate thing is that some of these disinfection byproducts are carcinogens, and they are monitored very closely. They're trihalomethanes is the word for those, but there's some trihalomethanes that definitely can mess you up. Chloroform, bromoform. There's a couple other really long name ones that I don't want to even try to butcher here on the radio, but basically everybody remembers when I say chloroform, they're like, oh yeah, that's what you put on the washcloth if you're trying to knock somebody out. Yes, that's exactly what it's used for, but it's also a very powerful carcinogen. So the EPA does monitor the level of trihalomethanes that is in the water, and like I said, it's something that is created from chlorine disinfection. So where I'm going with this is that they have found that the chlorine doesn't break down into these trihalomethanes as badly if they add ammonia in there. So I like to compare ammonia to, it's like a preservative that keeps the chlorine doing its job longer without it actually breaking down into these trihalomethanes with such huge levels that they become a health problem. So 30 to 40% of the municipalities across the U.S. have switched over to that. And our area here, Richmond, Henrico, Hanover, Chesterfield, they all use chloramines in addition to the chlorine. So the end of the day is that what's monitored is the total chlorine level. So and that is a mixture of chlorine and chloramines together. But here's kind of a cool thing. When we go out to somebody's house because they've got concerns about their water, if it's on city or county water, we already know that there's going to be some level of chlorine in there. So we actually spend, each one of my specialists has probably $10,000 worth of testing equipment with them. So accuracy is one of those things that if you don't know the accurate number, there's no way you're going to accurately be able to fix it. So we bring the most accurate devices out there, but we also bring a little blue box, and we test the chlorine with that little blue box. It's a little cheesy looking vial with some special drops, and when we put it in there, we test the water with that, and we kind of do the little shaky and the time thing. We hold it up to the chart, and it says ideal. And then we show it to our customer, and we say, "See, you see how right there?" I said, what part of the range is your water in?" And they'll say ideal. And then we show them that we're actually using a pool and spa test kit. So your water is ideal if it's a pool. So it really drives the point home that, for those of you that heard the preview for this show, we used the splash and we talk about the pool. It wasn't really a joke. It was to really drive home the fact that we have pool water coming out of our faucets. So it's important to go ahead and take that out because it impacts so much inside the house. I like to take the chlorine out because it's a health problem more than anything else, because you can absorb it through the skin. When you drink it, it gets absorbed in through the tissues of your mouth pretty readily. And when you're in the shower, I don't want to get in any trouble giving an analogy here, but most people's showers are a small little area, pretty confined, and you've got a shower head. And when you turn the water on, the water up until that valve is under pressure, kind of like a can of soda. But as soon as you let it out, just like a can of soda, if you take the top off, now all of a sudden you see all of the dissolved gases coming out in fizz. So your shower is the exact same way. You've got a lot of dissolved gases, chlorine, chloramines being some of them. And when you're in the shower, now you've basically got all of these gases coming out into this little cubicle that you're trying to bathe in. So it's kind of interesting because a lot of people are like, "Oh, I love my relaxing shower." And they may not even realize it, but I mentioned before, chloroform is one of those byproducts. So your relaxing shower may not be quite as healthy as you thought it might be because you're inhaling a lot of these gases. Nobody goes in the shower and actually holds their breath. And it's a little, I like to compare it to a gas chamber, which is a terrible way to put it, but that's effectively what it is. So to take the chlorine out of the water at the point of entry, which is where it first comes into your house, is very important for your health. The other reason that it's great to take it out at the point of entry is you're catching this chlorine before it has a chance to degrade anything that's plastic and rubber in the plumbing system of the house. And you can think about that. There's a lot of plumbing. Almost all the new houses are built with some sort of plastic plumbing, whether it's CPVC or PEX. The days of copper-built houses are pretty much gone unless you're in certain areas, just mainly from expense. But the chlorine makes plastics brittle, and it really destroys rubber. Here's a cool thing you can do at home. If you're on city water, everybody's got a toilet. If you were to go ahead and go back and lift the lid on the back of your toilet tank, and you reach your hand down in there, somewhere in the bottom of the toilet, there's probably a black rubber flapper or some gaskets where the tank is actually kind of bolted onto the rest of the toilet. Go ahead and touch those with your finger and then pull your hand out, and you're going to freak out when you see that your fingers look like an octopus has inked them. They're completely black, and you're going to have a hard time getting that off. And that is what happens when the chlorine starts to degrade all of those seals. It's important to keep that from happening for obvious reasons, because nobody wants leaks. I believe that I heard that 94%, I think it was, of all homeowners insurance claims revolve around flooding or water damage. So if you can try to keep the water from damaging your home, then that's always a good thing. Lower your homeowner's insurance, less claims, and at the end of the day, that's nobody really wants an insurance claim. So if we can keep the chlorine from making the pipes brittle and the seals from failing, then the water stays where it's supposed to be. And then you don't have to worry about it in your shower. And we haven't talked about drinking water yet. We're going to table that one for right now. But the other cool thing, and I really, what really started my conversion from a corporate career over into my current water guy career was I became a customer because I'd seen the demonstrations and I knew about the product, but I really never wrapped my head around how impactful having a system really could be until I had one. And chlorine, I'm on county water here, and the chlorine made a massive difference. I used to have to wear some decent looking clothes, colored clothes, dark colored clothes. And no matter what I did, I had a good washing machine. I used the darn detergent, the good stuff. I always just used to get so frustrated because my clothes would get faded out and the black clothes would get kind of little whitish tinges to it. And I'm constantly, I just figured it was a fact of life to find lint. You could almost make a sweater out of the amount of lint in a week that you'd collect from the dryer. I just figured that's how life is. But once I realized that I was washing all of my clothes in pool water, I would never take these clothes and throw them in a pool because that would just be crazy. You just destroy your clothes. But that's exactly what I was doing every time I did laundry. So there's so much stuff that having better water is going to make changes in everybody's house in a positive way. Those are just some of the cool things. We actually did a video. It's on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, the Connecticut. If you look for it, I should have really been ready to give you the actual name, but if you search for Connecticut Richmond, we have a chlorine test. It's pretty cool. You'll actually, instead of hearing me, you'll actually get a chance to see me. And actually, I think I was going through a phase where I completely shaved my head and grew my face out, which anybody seeing me right now is kind of would be looking at me going, "Are you the same person?" But anyway, I believe I was doing this demonstration using Henrico County water. No offense to Henrico, they do a great job, but to show the effects of chlorine in real life. What I ended up doing is we took like 3 cups, 3 glasses, and we put an equal amount of tap water in each one of these things. And one of them we didn't touch. One of them I submerged a couple of fingers of my hand in there to simulate kind of like washing your hands or taking a bath. And then the third one, I just basically swished it around in my mouth and spit it right back into the cup. And the chlorine tester that I was referring to on the pool test kit is pretty cool, because when you put drops of it in the cup, it'll show you how much chlorine is still in there. And in the cup that I didn't touch, you'll see the full level. It's pretty impressive how the color change shows you there's a huge amount of chlorine in there. And then the cup that I had my fingers in for actually a pretty brief time, I want to say less than 10 seconds, that chlorine level was cut in half. So that chlorine got absorbed by my skin. And then the one that I swished in my mouth was completely devoid, no chlorine left at all, which means that 100% of that chlorine went in through all the tissues of my mouth. So I just sucked it up like a chlorine sponge. So check out that video. It's actually pretty cool. But it'll show you how your body can pull in. And if, the moral of that story is you're either going to get a filter or you're going to be a filter. So we had a lot of fun with that one. So chlorine is one of those things that it's one of the simpler ones to take out. Now, chloramine is a little tougher to pull out, but we test the water to find out which one is a bigger problem for you. But really, it's specialty carbons are very, very effective against chlorine, and it's kind of like a big fridge filter for your whole house. Think of it like that. It's just something that water all runs through a unit that will go ahead and reduce the amount of chlorine. I'm very careful to anybody that's in the business knows you cannot use the word remove, because remove implies 100%. Everything that we do reduces. It's almost impossible to remove something. So I'm not intentionally being cagey with any of the words that I'm using. I just like to put it in context that when I use the word reduce, there's legal reasons why I have to say that. But anyway, we do the testing. We find out exactly what you need. We see what your potential flow rate would be. We look at the budget, of course. We've got systems for every single budget that's out there. We look at how many people are in the house, and then we can go ahead and recommend something that works for you. And our website, again, is kineticorichmond.com. Look like kinetic energy with an O on the end, kineticorichmond.com, 877-60-WATER. And that's spelled out in case you don't have that feature on the phone anymore, 877-609-2837. You can ask us any questions that you might have. And we'd love to hear about any questions that you'd like to hear on future episodes. But we'll be back in a bit. Welcome back. This is Paul, the water guy. We just, in our last segment, we were just talking about the interesting contaminant known as chlorine and chloramine, and how we can go ahead and take care of that and get rid of the pool water that everybody that has City of Richmond and Enrico, Hanover, Chesterfield, everybody that's got that water, we definitely can fix the chlorine levels that are in there. We compare it to the bag at the grocery store. You use it to get your products home, but you don't eat the bag. So in this one, the other big thing that actually impacts everybody that's listening is what everybody refers to as hardness. So hardness is actually it's actually calcium in the water, and it can, when it comes back out of being dissolved in your water, it leaves deposits around the house. You'll see some people refer to it as scale, where water evaporates, like let's say shower doors. You can see it. It looks like they're frosted and etched. That's actually the calcium kind of drying out and getting to be a problem, and actually destroying everything in the house if it's not addressed, because it can get in there to the point where it just can't be removed anymore. The other thing about hardness is hardness can vary. In this area, most of our houses and places, residences that we go to, the hardness ranges anywhere from 1 grain all the way up to usually about 9 or 10 grains is a pretty high level around here. Up in Ohio, for example, their average grains up there is usually in the 30s. So hardness isn't the same no matter where you are in the United States. And that's important because people are moving around a lot. And we see folks, and a lot of these people from the Midwest, sometimes they'll come down here and they'll say, yeah, I want a water softener, but I don't like that slick feeling. We hear that a lot. And the interesting thing about that, number one, this is the only time you're ever going to hear me say the word slick, because slick is not a word that we like. I prefer to use the word silky. It's It's actually a much better description, and it's not a negative, because silky is actually what the goal is. But it's kind of interesting because the feel of the water, soft water, isn't the same everywhere, and by that I mean it's relative to how hard the water was before it went through a water softener. So if you have, let's say, Ohio, and you're 30 grains hard, and then you're moving down here to Richmond and you're at 8, that's less than a third of the hardness level that you had where you came from. Now, if you had a softener up there, which honestly you almost have to have a softener when you've got levels that high, because you're just going to destroy everything in your house very quickly in under a year. But it does have a somewhat extreme silky feeling, which to some people it's one of those things that they don't really like. But the way to explain that, first I have to explain how a water softener works. And to explain that, I really have to kind of say that a water softener is the only efficient way to go ahead and deal with hardness. Now, there's some other things out there that aren't really going to address the hardness. Most of them are sold online. There's some we call the magic wire. There's one out there, you're going to love this, that it's going to magically fix whatever is in your water by running. It's not called the magic wire. I made that name up, but anybody that has seen this knows exactly what I'm talking about. But basically, it's a little box that plugs into the wall. You got a wire that comes out of it. It wraps around your pipe, on the outside of your pipe, 64 times. And then it goes back to this little box that has an LED light on it, so that when it's plugged into the wall, the light goes on, which means it's magically fixing your water. And we say magically because that's the only way that this could work. It works on any type pipe, according to them. And it's funny because whenever we run into this one, I can always run a test, hardness test in the house anywhere, and show the customer that it does absolutely nothing. And then they're quite disappointed that they got scammed. But at least they learned before another day passed. So there's other ways of supposedly dealing with hardness in the water, but the only real way is with a softener. So there's different types of softeners, but they all operate in the exact same way when it comes down to the guts and the chemical process that makes them work. If you can imagine a tank, and this tank holds, it looks like plastic sand or small plastic beads. That material is called resin. And the resin is kind of captured in there. There's these strainers that basically keep the resin from going into your water. But all of your water goes through the resin. So the resin has a negative charge put on it when it's first made. And it's pretty cool. I don't really understand exactly how that is permanent, but it lasts for literally, we've seen upwards of 30 years of resin that's still effective in the field. But this negatively charged resin, I like to get real animated when I'm trying to explain this to people. It's going to be a little bit tougher on the air, but if you could imagine me sitting in here dancing around with my hands, and my hands are negative hungry hands. I'm given a bath in salt water when I'm first made, and my negative hungry hands are going to grab the sodium that's in the salt water. So salt water is sodium chloride, and when you dissolve sodium chloride in the water, the sodium is floating around dissolved ionically, and it's got a positive charge. So my little hungry negative hands are going to grab a hold of this as much of the sodium as I could possibly hang on to. And then, the chlorides, we don't use that. That just goes down the drain. So when a softener is first made and ready to be put in service, it's got a whole load of these resin beads that are holding on to sodium. And then we're hooked up to your house, and your water comes in and flows down through this bed of resin. And let's say your water is hard. You've got a lot of calcium carbonate floating around, and that when that is dissolved in the water, it has a positive charge as well. But the resin wants to grab a hold of the hardness more than it wants to hang on to the sodium. So if you can imagine, one of my hands is going to drop a sodium so that it can hold on to a hardness, and the other one is going to drop its sodium so it can grab a hold of a hardness. That's effectively how a water softener works. It's called ion exchange. It doesn't actually just suck things out of your water. It exchanges the hardness for sodium. And hopefully I didn't nerd out too much on that, but the whole point of that is that the harder your water is, the more sodium is going to be released into it when it's being softened. So that accounts for how the water feels. So if your water was 30 grains hard, now you've got 3 times more sodium than if your water was 10 grains hard. So the effect is 3 times more. Long and the short of it is that every single time I've had somebody that was really concerned about their water being excessively silky, we were able to kind of bring a demonstration unit out and make some soft water out of their water. And what we call it the hand wash, where we can actually give you a demonstration. You can wash your hands with your own water after it's gone through a softener. And the results, I have yet to have one person tell me, oh, that's terrible. Every single one of them is like, oh, that's great. That's exactly what I was shooting for. So that's kind of in a nutshell how the softener works. Now, if you can imagine this whole bed of resin is sitting there grabbing a ridiculous amount of hardness out of the water. Eventually, I like to compare it to a magnet being dipped in a paperclip box. I'm sure we've all done that at some point in our lives, and you can do that a couple times, and then you've got so many paper clips on this magnet that it just won't grab anymore. So that's kind of how the resin is when it's grabbed as much of the hardness as it possibly can. And then it needs to be cleaned. So every single water softener that's out there residentially has to regenerate. And that's a fancy word for basically it has to clean itself. So they all use salt. If you are not using salt, you do not have a water softener. It's just that simple. The salt, like I said, is a sodium chloride dissolved in the water. Now, I've intentionally not talked about the other types of salts like potassium, but it's the exact same process, but instead of using sodium, it uses potassium. Potassium costs about 3.5, maybe 4 times more for a bag of it. So unless there's a specific purpose for using potassium, the regular old sea salt is, which is exactly what they make water softener salt out of. That's what 99% of people use. But there's always a drum or some sort of area where you're going to put water softener salt, and the water softener will go ahead and take some water and put it in there with the salt and make brine, just like you would brine a turkey. But it's basically making salt water. And it doesn't put salt water into the water that goes into your house. It uses the salt water like soap to go ahead and wash off all those contaminants and go ahead and put the sodium back on the resin like it was at the beginning. So that's really how the process works. It uses salt water, washes itself down with a concentrated wave of sodium, knocks off all the contaminants, gives the resin the sodium that it needs to go ahead and do this process all over again. It gets a rinse because nobody likes getting a mouthful of salt water. And then it turns itself back on, and your house is treated and softened again. That's how every single water softener works. Now, the Kineticos are different because instead of one tank, there's actually 2 tanks, and that's important. There's a couple other differences between them, but the main one with a Kinetico is that, number one, there's no electricity. it doesn't have any clocks, it doesn't have any power, it doesn't have any motors. The cool thing about a Kinetico softener is that you can actually put one underwater and it will run just fine. You try that with any other unit that's out there without naming brand names, all their circuitry is fried in a matter of a quarter of a second. So they're the only ones that can handle being underwater in a flood or something like that. But they're driven by the kinetic energy of water going through them, hence the name Kinetico. But there's 2 tanks instead of 1 tank. And if you only have 1 tank, then you have to decide, well, when am I going to go ahead and clean myself? Because if I clean myself during the day when people are using water, then for roughly an hour, hour and a half, you have to use regular nasty water in your house because the unit doesn't have a way of giving you soft water and clean itself. With a Kinetico twin tank, it's pretty cool because it simply takes 1 tank that you were using and switches you over to the fresh tank, and then it starts to clean the dirty tank. So it doesn't know what time it is. It doesn't care what time it is. You have 24/7 treated water in a very, very simple way. It uses water to clean the dirty tank that has actually gone through the new tank first. So it may sound simple, but when you're using clean water to clean yourself, you're going to get clean. Now, a single tank, all the other units that are out there operate with, is 1 tank that cleans itself with water that's coming in, which is dirty water. We compare that to taking a bath in a mud puddle. You're only going to be as clean as that mud puddle is going to let you, which is important because a water softener it's a cheap water softener is not good, and a good water softener is not cheap. But it should last you decades. Actually, we in this area here, I go as far as to put lifetime warranties on our twin tank premium units. And I can do that because I know that it's using clean water to clean itself. I'll never have to deal with a motor, a circuit board, a power failure, a lightning strike, anything that could impact how that unit works, because there's no electricity, there's no batteries, there's nothing that could electrically go wrong with it. And another cool thing is we have folks that have had Kineticos here in the Richmond area since I believe the late 90s is when they started in this area with another dealership. So we've got units that are well over 20 years old at this point, and they're running just fine. Some of the tougher water will eventually take its toll on anything, and a Kinetico is great because I can literally take a 20-year-old unit back to the shop, and in 2-3 days max, I can completely do an overhaul on it and replace seals and gaskets and things and resin and put it back in the field, and it'll be good for another 20 years. So it's kind of cool that I like to think that we're protecting the environment by not having a whole bunch of extra systems that are just literally being disposed of in dumpsters and landfills. Yeah, the Kinetico, it literally will last forever as a water softener. So that was a full segment just on hardness here. I know that I glossed over that real quick. I did want to point out that we do have a full team here in Richmond. We're actually located over in Highland Springs, over by the airport. If anybody wanted to stop by, you can visit our website at kineticorichmond.com, or feel free to give us a call. Our office is typically open 9:30 to 5:30, but we do have folks answering the phones 24/7. You can reach us at 877-60-WATER. And that's 877-609-2837. Look forward to hearing any questions that you might have. We've got some video content out there on YouTube. You can find our channel at ConnecticutRichmond.com. You'll be able to see some of my various hairstyles here. I've had everything from hair to no hair, and I like to keep it interesting. When I was years ago, I had a peer. I shouldn't tell you this, but I had a peer that he told me he liked to change his hairstyle every 4 months. And at the time, I thought he was crazy. But it was so cool that now I try to do it. Thanks for listening. We look forward to hearing from you with thoughts, questions, things you'd like us to answer next time. And we will be back with you next Saturday at 10 a.m.
You've been listening to the Connecticut Water Guy Hour. Join us next week for another edition with Paul, your Connecticut Water Guy. Opinions expressed on the program may not necessarily reflect the views of station management and ownership. Portions been recorded.